Welcome to Chit Chatter with Rhea, the podcast that provides information to you about the legal and political process. Now here's your host, Rhea Chattergoon.
Welcome back to Chit Chatter, guys. Well, so much has been happening. I know it's been a while since the last podcast, but so much has been happening personally and on the work front. With the work front, employment law is usually a hotbed in the beginning of the year. You've got a lot of companies making changes, a lot of severance agreements being handed out, a lot of terminations happening. So I tend to get busy at the beginning of the year. And then on the personal front, I think I mentioned the last time that my husband and I have been planning this renovation of our house. It was either move or renovate the house. And with housing prices in South Florida, it's actually better for us to gut our entire house and stay put. So that's what we're doing. It's been a year and a half of planning, a year and a half of dealing with insurance claims because we had a leaky pipe. So that's been going on. We're getting ready to hopefully gear up in the next 3 weeks. I don't know. It's been one thing after the next. Right now we're dealing with a permit issue with my city. So hopefully that gets resolved. But in the meantime, I have to pack my entire house and move out and basically move back in. So that's always fun. I've been posting some short videos on my Instagram, which, let me tell you, I got a lot of hate for. I mean, boy, did the MAGA crowd come for me. I was told to, I think it was a video I did on DeSantis's, basically his militia that he's forming in Florida. And the MAGA crowd, I mean, I guess that's how the algorithm works on Instagram. It's like once one person with a point of view comments, like it starts going to these other people. But if you haven't checked out my Instagram, go check out that video. It's interesting. I think it got like 300 and something views, and it was mostly by MAGA people leaving me nasty comments to move out of the state if I didn't like it here, and I should move to California and see how they're doing. I mean, the usual racist trope, right? Nothing new, nothing that brown and black people haven't dealt with in this country. But I always find it so funny that these white people, and that's who they were, feel so comfortable telling other people to, move out of the state or go back to their country, or, why is it that they feel so freaking entitled to a place? I mean, it's really just an interesting study, and something to observe. But it's almost like, well, what do you want me to say? Okay, I'll listen to you. I'll move. I mean, who doesn't want to move the hell out of Florida right now? Have you seen what's going on? I posted yesterday on the Instagram feed, or the story, I should say, that the Florida Department of Education spelt 9th and 12th grade wrong. The Florida Department of Education. I mean, it's just horrific what's going on here. And I'll get into that later. So much has happened since the last podcast. Harry Belafonte died this Tuesday. Belafonte was a civil rights activist up until his death at 96 years old. He was only 2 years older than Martin Luther King Jr. So to put it in perspective, had Martin Luther King Jr. not been assassinated, he probably would have been here. Belafonte is known in the U.S., I should say, as the King of Calypso. So there's always been sort of a connection to my home country of Trinidad. There was some discord there of him being regarded the King of Calypso because us Trinidadians disagree. But I will say, to his credit, he really worked with several Calypsonians from Trinidad and was a great supporter of the art form and made it known where Calypso came from. He always gave the Calypsonians credit. He always talked highly of them. So it wasn't sort of a misappropriation on his part. It was just Americans dubbing him as the King of Calypso. So rest in peace to Harry Belafonte. Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon, got fired this week. Tucker, Tuck, as my awesome Joy Reid calls him, got fired from Fox News. And a lot of people are assuming it has to do with these lawsuits against Fox News. We know Dominion settled their lawsuit with Fox News. I am hoping, and I'm just assuming here, that as part of that settlement, Tucker Carlson was fired. And a lot of the lawsuit and the videos hinged on some of Tucker Carlson's deposition testimony and recordings that came out. And so a lot of people are upset about the Dominion lawsuit being settled. They say, oh, well, they should have taken them to trial. And I just want to give you my legal perspective on it. And again, this is just my opinion. It could differ from another lawyer's. But usually when cases are about to go to trial, and this Dominion lawsuit was about to start trial, I believe the Tuesday following the settlement is when the trial was supposed to start. Usually at that point, you're entertaining settlement offers because the risk of going to trial versus a settlement in the case is sometimes more beneficial to a company. In this case, I am not mad at the settlement. I mean, listen, it's a drop in the bucket for Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News, the $787 million. But I will say the Dominion lawyers were very strategic on when this settlement happened. And so while a lot of people are downplaying, that the settlement occurred and trial should have happened, I want to point out that all of the juiciness came out before the settlement, right? So there couldn't have been a confidentiality agreement. I mean, we had the deposition transcripts of Tucker Carlson calling Trump, an idiot, etc. We had all of the admissions that they knew the election wasn't stolen and that they kept pushing that trope. I mean, all of that came out before the settlement. So I think putting it into perspective, Dominion got what they wanted, and they got $787 million. So, there are more lawsuits in the pipeline. So it's not over yet. I think Fox is trying to figure out how to slow the bleed here. And Tucker Carlson just happens to be part of that. Listen, he's going to end up somewhere else. I'm sure you guys have listened to all the news outlets. I mean, he's going to end up somewhere more right-wing, Newsmax, the OWN network, one of them, because, that's sort of what sells. And the MAGA crowd who like him and follow him will continue to do so. Don Lemon got fired as well. I'm not a huge Don Lemon fan. I mean, I do think he's taken a turnabout in the last few years or so, but, he made an ageist comment against some women, politicians, I should say, Nikki Haley, who I could care less for. But I would like to say that his firing, though, came directly after he pushed back on a guest who was claiming that the Civil War allowed blacks to get access to the Second Amendment. And he really gave some pushback on that and asked the guest to stop lying. His co-host was very quiet during that exchange. And subsequently after that, he got fired. I'm not worried about Don Lemon. In fact, he was on the Times red carpet saying, don't worry about me. And I'm not worried because usually those types of contracts that I've seen have a parachute clause. And so I'm sure the firing, if it was without cause or even if it was cause but delineated by some specific acts. What else happened this week? Oh, President Biden and Vice President Harris announced they are running for reelection. No surprise there, right? People were making comments about Biden's age and, he's going to be in his 80s. And look, listen, while I agree, I wish the options for presidents were not old white men. I think it's a lot of ageism there, and listen, I pursue age discrimination claims. I see this all the time. So look, Biden has had some gaffes, right? We see, but it's just his way. It's Uncle Joe. But look at what he's accomplished in the last 2 years. I mean, by any president's standards, it's commendable. But again, the Democrats don't sell their accomplishments. It gets lost in the weeds. They don't market themselves well. and that's part of the problem, because the American people are not seeing that what Biden and Harris have done in the last 2 years, how it really affects them, how it really affects your daily life. And so, look, talk about the American Rescue Plan, right? It assisted with recovery from COVID. It was actually a widely popular plan, even with some of the diehard right-wing crowd who benefited from it. They won't acknowledge it, but they benefited from it. We got a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, right? Which we needed. We needed because our bridges and our roads are falling apart. I mean, you're talking about $284 billion for transportation needs. At some point, we will get high-speed rail in America because we're so behind the ball on that. But we're getting to repair bridges, roadways, public transportation. We're getting $65 billion for broadband internet, power infrastructure. I mean, the bill had a lot in it, and it was a bipartisan achievement. You had 32 Republicans, don't quote me on that figure, who crossed the aisle to ensure that this bill passed. And, again, it goes to show what we can get done with actual discussions by our leaders, actual discussions on things that can help the American people. Donald Trump was out there pressing the Republicans to vote against the bill, but key leaders of the Republican Party, specifically Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, supported the legislation. Those who didn't support the legislation, like your boy Ted Cruz, was then promoting all of the money they got for their state through this bill. I mean, hypocrisy at its best, right? And that's why I keep saying to you guys, I could never be in politics, because I would just call them out at every step. What else did Biden do in the last 2 years? We got the largest gun safety bill to pass Congress in nearly 30 years. It's not perfect. There's more to be done. There's a lot more to be done. But, it's historically significant. The bill was somewhat of a non-starter for some people, but eventually passed because the public was calling for it. And listen, it will ultimately assist in saving lives. Again, there's more to be done on that. Biden also passed the CHIPS and Science Act last year. I think it was, I want to say $53 or $54 billion in federal funding to manufacture semiconductor chips instead of relying on China to produce them. So I don't know if you guys remember, but at some part during COVID, the production of cars stalled because we didn't have these chips, right? Washing machines, anything that uses these chips or semiconductors were being stalled. We had a supply and demand issue going on there. And we couldn't get these chips over to the US. And so I know I was in the middle of trying to buy a car last February, and there was literally nothing available. I didn't get the car I wanted because of it. So that CHIPS and Science Act is, one, not only going to allow for manufacturing in the United States so that we're not dealing with these supply chain issues, but it's also going to create jobs. And that's always a good thing for America. What else did Biden do? The Inflation Reduction Act, right? All of these Republican senators and congressmen talking about inflation and how he caused inflation. All of them voted no on the Reduction Act, right? But what we're seeing is that act, which was passed last year, we're seeing sort of the trickle down of how that has been assisting the American people. For example, just off the top of my head, the $8 billion or $80 billion for the IRS to hire new agents and modernize its technology, audit the wealthy, right? Which is why most of the Republicans voted no on that. But that's going to help the American people. It's going to speed up the process of you getting your refunds. And in fact, the IRS just released that they're going to, I believe, start with instant refunds. So that was part of that $80 billion going to the IRS, right? That Inflation Reduction Act also capped out-of-pocket prescription insulin, which I believe is at $35, which, by the way, is still high, but especially when you're looking at places in Canada that you can get it for $7. So, look, those are things that are going to help the everyday American people. Also passed was the Respect for Marriage Act, requiring that interracial, in 2022, by the way, because that's when it was passed, interracial marriage and gay marriage be recognized in every state. So it basically codified case law. And that was a direct reflection of the Dobbs decision that overturned the right to an abortion. And the reason that was passed was because Clarence Thomas signaled that gay marriage was next on the agenda for this right-wing court that we have. Look, why haven't we passed an abortion bill yet? Well, they tried. They tried, but we couldn't even get our own party on the same page. Joe Manchin fucked that up for us. Excuse my language, but I can't stand him. And as a result, we're seeing all of these ridiculous abortion bans happening across the country. I talked a little bit about what's going on in Florida in a short video on Instagram, but we essentially have now a complete ban. We're seeing complete bans across the nation. They're coding it as a 6-week ban, but honestly, if you're a woman, that 6 weeks is a complete ban. Right now, we're waiting for a Supreme Court decision on the lawsuit over Mifepristone. That is the drug that can end pregnancies under 10 weeks. And that is interesting. It's an interesting lawsuit. So let me tell you how that lawsuit got started. It was filed in Amarillo, Texas, late last year by the Alliance Defending Freedom. It's a conservative Christian legal group because, these conservative Christians have to push their religion on everyone. But it basically brought a lawsuit stating that the FDA's approval of Mifepristone overstepped the FDA's regulatory authority. So the first thing is, why was this brought in Amarillo, Texas? Well, there's only one judge there, one federal judge there, Judge Matthew Casemark. I think I'm saying that right, who was nominated and confirmed during Donald Trump's presidency. He's the sole district judge there. So you pick that venue because you're going to get that judge assigned to your case, right? So to give you some perspective, if you file a federal case in the Southern District of Florida, that is West Palm, or actually Fort Myers, I believe, down to the Keys, you can get any selected amount or any selected judge. They're sort of on a wheel that they get selected. So you don't know which judge you're going to get, and that provides forum shopping. Here, they filed this in Amarillo, Texas, because there was only one district judge there, and this is happening across the country. And so this particular judge, since taking the bench, and there were a lot of issues with his confirmation, by the way. He should not have been confirmed. Google it yourself. I'm not going to spend the time talking about it. But since taking the bench, he's ruled against the Biden administration on several issues, including immigration, LGBTQ protections, etc. So on April 7th, this judge ruled that he would revoke the FDA's approval of Mifepristone, putting everybody into a tailspin, right? He did put the decision on hold for a week to allow for the appeal. The problem is that the same day he issued his order, another court in Washington state issued a separate ruling in a lawsuit brought by liberal states seeking to preserve access to Mifepristone. So there's now a conflict between the states and needs to be resolved by the Supreme Court. And that's what the Biden administration did and appealed, stating to the Supreme Court that it's impossible to follow both judges' directives at the same time. So I've actually been waiting to record the podcast, hoping that the SCOTUS would give us a ruling on this, but they haven't. And I think because they're struggling with it, right? So a little bit about the drug Mifepristone. It's been approved by the FDA for more than 20 years. It's been used, by millions of women over the past 20 years to safely end pregnancies. I will tell you, this drug is used usually not just for abortion in the way that they're claiming, the 1% of women who choose to abort for personal reasons. I mean, they're all personal reasons, but you get what I'm saying. But this drug is widely used for miscarriages which occur, and then the body can't discharge the tissue. I know this because I've had 2 miscarriages. One of them, my body would not discharge, and I had to use this drug. So, it's again, when we talk about abortion issues, it's very personal, and I think it's personal to every woman, which is why the government should stay the fuck out of our uterus for it. But, we're waiting to see what happens here, and it's going to be interesting, right? Because if the SCOTUS agrees with this Amarillo, Texas judge, then what they're basically doing is overturning the FDA's regulatory authority to make the rules and regulations concerning these drugs. And it's going to create a lot of fallout for a lot of other drugs. So Congress provides the FDA and other agencies with regulatory authority. That means they get to make the rules and regulations concerning whatever they oversee. In this case, the FDA oversees medication. So that's important, right? Because Congress recognizes that it's best to leave that rulemaking authority to the agencies who have experts in their specific fields. Unlike the fucking politicians who don't even know how pregnancies work and want to ban abortions, right? So let's leave these decisions to the experts. This is going to have a real impact on regulatory authority for a lot of these agencies. So I think the SCOTUS, while the handmaiden that sits there is probably pushing for this, I think they're going to have a real issue with this decision. But in the meantime, what we're hearing are more and more women having to be damn near death to be given life-saving treatment in some states. I mean, more and more stories are coming out with women bleeding out in bathrooms and, waiting so long to abort fetuses that are harming their bodies that they are now prohibited from having babies in the futures. I mean, you talk to any medical professionals, you listen to them testify at the Capitol, and they're beside themselves, because they can't provide the medical care to their patients for fear of being charged with a crime. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. What kind of country does this? And all I can come up with is one that doesn't like women, including those fucking women, by the way, who support these measures. Excuse my language. I get really enraged with this. But there are some women introducing these bills. You look at in Florida, Senator Erin Grall, I think she's out of Fort Pierce. She's the one who introduced the 6-week ban. I mean, honestly, I would not like to see her in person because I've got some choice words for her. I don't care about your religious beliefs. I always say, if you don't want to have an abortion or if you don't believe in abortion, don't have one. Why are you infringing upon the rights of other women in this country? I mean, these women make me sick. But speaking of the SCOTUS, the chief judge, John Roberts, refused to testify before the Judiciary Committee, who are trying to determine the ethics rules for the SCOTUS. Because remember, we talked in a previous episode that there are no ethics rules for the SCOTUS. The federal judiciary they have ethics rules, but for some reason our SCOTUS doesn't. And so Judge Roberts refused to testify, saying it's unprecedented. Well, the only way to make something unprecedented is to actually do it. But, it's just a cop-out for him. He's leading just an illegitimate court that the public has no respect for at this point. But it also comes on the heels of some interesting news for Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch failing to disclose some financial issues, right? So it came out that Clarence Thomas failed to disclose trips and the selling of his house to Harlan Crow, who is a wealthy real estate developer and well-known Republican donor. So there was some backtalk that Crow's didn't have an interest in the Supreme Court, which is bullshit. It's complete bullshit. He's a member of the board of the American Enterprise Institute, which has cases and has interests before the Supreme Court, right? And so, and not only that, I mean, when the internet sleuths go after you, they go after you. And so there was some digging. Thomas hid decades of gifts and travels by Harlan Crow because, quote unquote, he was a personal friend and he didn't have to disclose that. But when you have a major conservative donor who has interest before the work of the Supreme Court, that should be disclosed. That's just morally right. But we know about these people and their morals, right? So the transaction, and so by the way, Crow bought Thomas's mother's house, which by the way, she still lives in. He bought that and then 2 plots down it. Now, Crow claims he bought it so that he could preserve it for when, there's, I guess, some sort of museum for Clarence Thomas after he's dead. Hopefully that's soon. No, I'm not going to regret saying that statement. I think he is just to use my son's wording, a booger on the American public. I cannot stand him. But so it's just interesting, right? Like none of this stuff has been disclosed. Thomas came out and said, oh, well, it was a misstep and he didn't know he had to disclose it. You didn't know you had to disclose it. Bro, like you are making decisions on people's livelihoods and lives. I mean, this is the same man who came out last year and wrote an opinion stating that evidence against a man on death row that proved he didn't commit a murder couldn't be accepted by the court. I mean, really? And you don't know, you're not smart enough to know that you should disclose these types of issues? I mean, it's complete bullshit, right? I mean, and he's been caught in the past. He's the same person who didn't disclose his wife, Ginny Thomas, who's implicated in the January 6th insurrection. He didn't disclose her $686,000 of income. And he continues to rule on cases that not only implicates his wife somewhat, but also that are being brought by some of these groups that are giving him these gifts. All right. But he's not the only one. Neil Gorsuch, it came out after this because, the internet sleuths are now investigating everyone. Neil Gorsuch, it showed that he and 2 partners sold a vacation property that they were trying to offload for 2 years. He sold it right after his appointment to the Supreme Court. And listen, I don't think it was illegal that he didn't disclose it. Ethically, should he have disclosed it? Yes. The records show that the CEO of Greenberg Traurig, Greenberg Traurig is one of the top 5 firms, largest firms in the United States. That firm frequently has business before the court. But the CEO bought this property from Neil Gorsuch. And, it wouldn't have been unusual if he bought it, but it's that he bought it after it being on the market for 2 years and they were having issues selling it. But all of a sudden, Brian Duffy and his wife, Carrie Duffy, bought the property. I think it should be disclosed. I mean, there needs to be some intensified scrutiny on these financial entanglements. Thank you, Jada Pinkett Smith, for that word. On the Supreme Court. We still don't know how Brett Kavanaugh paid off $200,000 in credit card debts and his $92,000 country club fee. I mean, he's come out and said that it was a gift from his parents, the credit card debt. Which, listen, it probably could have been, right? But there's no proof. There has been no chain that shows that it came from his parents. So we've got to figure out if our Supreme Court is being bought and paid for. It looks like it's happening. But until there's proof, I guess we just sit here and speculate. What else happened? I talked a little bit on a short video. The Tennessee GOP lost their damn minds, expelled 2 representatives, the 2 black representatives, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, for standing with their constituents and demanding gun reform. They were eventually reinstated days later, but the GOP didn't stop there. After they were reinstated, they continued to limit their time to speak on the floor. They passed a Confederate History Month, all while, stories came out that the GOP representatives had a slew of decorum-related issues, right? Also, can we talk about why Confederate History Month is being passed in any state? I mean, people do realize they lost, right? You do realize they lost the war. They lost the war, and the Confederates were trying to keep slavery. Like, that is the whole history of the war. You look into the history of the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag wasn't even the Confederate flag at the time. It was adopted from West Virginia. Google it yourself. I'm not going to go into it. Google it. A simple Google will teach you where the Confederate flag came from. But going back to the decorum issues with these GOP representatives in Tennessee, lots of juicy stories came out. Scott Campbell, who is a GOP rep, resigned after being found guilty of sexually harassing one or two legislative interns. Now, what's interesting is the GOP knew that prior to expelling Jones and Pearson. They knew that he was found guilty of it. They had a whole ethics investigation, but they did nothing because, decorum. Decorum's good for one and not for the other. It wasn't until Campbell was confronted by a member of the press who brought this to light that Campbell resigned. The GOP didn't expel him for sexually harassing interns, guys. Okay? And then because, when you play with fire, you get burned, it also came out that the Tennessee Speaker of the House didn't actually reside in the district that he represents and may be violating Tennessee residency laws for elected officials. There were also allegations that he was having a marital affair with a lobbyist who's also married. I mean, look, those kinds of affairs aren't earth-shattering in those political circles, right? But it's the self-righteousness that these folks have when it comes to talking about decorum, in front of the camera. And then they're having all of this dirt and skeletons in their closet. I mean, they're just fucking hypocrites. And it's becoming a common theme. And it's honestly just mind-blowing over and over and over that these are the people who talk about family values and talk about suppressing the rights of others to promote quote unquote family values. Meanwhile, they're screwing their coworker's wife in the closet. I mean, it's unreal. It's unreal. But a lot of these states are following in these footsteps, right? Montana recently, I think it was this week, Zoe Zephyr, who's a transgendered representative who was duly elected by her constituents. They banned her from speaking on the floor because, quote unquote, decorum. And all she said was, the passing of these transgender bills that Montana was trying to pass would end up with blood being on these representatives' hands. And that was apparently, against the rules of decorum. Oklahoma and West Virginia are passing child marriages bills or enforcing child marriages, I should say. West Virginia refused to pass a bill limiting or raising, I should say, the limit for child marriage from 14 to 16. 43 states allow for child marriage in America. 43, guys. 43. I watched some of the people speaking in favor of child marriage. Okay. Yes, you heard that right. In favor. And it's honestly disgusting and sickening. There was one clip that was going around by Missouri State Senator Mike Moon, who stated that he knew at least one person who got married at 12-year-olds and followed up with the comment, guys. And guess what? They're still married. A 12-year-old. I don't want to even imagine what the man was, how old the man was, right? He doubled down on it. He further went on to defend his position and stated that the girl's parents consented, so it wasn't forced marriage. the United States of America. These are the same people who condemn these practices in other countries and for other religions, right? Because let this be a Muslim girl being forced to be married at 12 years old. They'd call it inhumane. They'll call them third world countries. But here in America, because it's based in Christianity, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, the hypocrisy, guys. The hypocrisy is just crazy. Speaking of hypocrisy, let's talk about my home state of Florida, where the wave of hate bills passing just seem to be more and more unreal as time goes on. So there are 3 bills involving transgender women, men, and children. First up was the bill involving doctors not being able to provide medical treatments such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or surgery to transgender children. That bill would put into law rules that are already approved by the Florida State Medical Board, meaning to keep doctors from providing certain gender dysphoria treatments to minors. It goes against, what the medical professionals are saying. It actually goes against mainstream advice from the World Health Organization, or the WHO, and the American Medical Association, all of which are recommending gender-affirming healthcare to transgender people. This bill, by the way, the gender-affirming care, does not only affect transgender people. There are a lot of implications to other people who need hormone therapy, specifically young women. I'm going to talk about that more in depth on the next episode. I'm hoping to have a guest on that could talk more fluently about that issue. But there was the other bill preventing children from attending drag shows, because apparently drag shows and not guns are killing our children. Whatever happened to allowing parents to choose for their children? Remember when COVID happened and all of these parents didn't want their kids wearing masks and opposed masks in the schools because they had a right to choose what was best for their children, right? They did the same thing with the vaccines. Why isn't that the same for drag shows? If I want to take my son to see a drag show, I will. If I don't want to, don't take him. It's as simple as that. But what the bill is essentially doing, by the way, is penalizing an establishment from hosting events that feature these types of performances, right? And it's very broad, I want to say, because it depicts or stimulates nudity, sexual conduct, sexual excitement, etc. So is this going to penalize strip clubs? I mean, it's very broad. It's very, very broad. It's so broad that the internet picked up that the person who introduced this bill, Randy Fine, who is from Brevard County, and is a disgusting human being, quite frankly, if you watch him speak on the floor, on the House floor. And I hope he hears me one day calling him a disgusting human being, because I think he is. His wife was putting together a burlesque show to raise money for charity, and people were calling her out because doesn't that stimulate or depict sexual excitement or sexual conduct? And by the way, it was a charity to raise funds for kids. So it's just so freaking hypocritical. The other bill was the bill that prevented the transgender men and women from using bathrooms that don't line up with their sex at birth. That was a battle over student and staff access in restrooms for school. And so the bill would be for all publicly available restrooms and facilities. Again, infringing on private businesses and how they operate their business. There was also a bill up for part of the transgender affirming care was preventing private businesses from providing insurance coverage for gender affirming care. And again, here is the party of small government infringing on a private employer's right to provide certain medical coverages for its employees. The hypocrisy is real, guys. The other important bill that is up or coming up for a vote, I don't think they voted on it yet, actually, is this immigration bill. And so this bill, it comes on the heels of DeSantis's shipping off migrants to, using taxpayer dollars, let me be clear, to ship migrants to a Martha's Vineyard, right? So the bill proposed is sort of a anti-immigration bill that would give $12 million to DeSantis to fly migrants or to provide transportation for migrants, right? Because he was wrong in using taxpayers' dollars the last time, but we've talked about that at length. But what the bill will do, and I think the most important part of it, is make it a felony if you have someone who's undocumented visiting in your home, living in your home, driving in your car. It provides an offense of a second-degree felony if that happens. And that's the biggest takeaway from it, right? It would also bar local governments from spending taxpayers' dollars to provide ID cards for people who can't provide proof of citizenship. It would invalidate driver's license issued by another state to someone who can't prove their citizenship. I mean, there's a slew of things that will be affected by this legislation. And to promote something like this in Florida to a community who frequently has undocumented immigrants in its state, they're trying to claim, oh, this will help illegal immigration. No, it won't. No, it won't. And you know what? I'm going to say it, and I know my Cuban friends are going to be upset with me because it's personal to them. But what happens to those undocumented Cubans that come over on boats? I mean, I know they get asylum, but during that period of time, if you're housing your undocumented relative in your house, you can be charged with a second-degree felony. And the people who are promoting this legislation are the people you voted for. 54% of the Latin vote in South Florida came from the Cuban community and for the GOP. And this is what they're doing. I know that is a longer conversation to be had. I'm hoping to have a young Cuban American activist on the show to talk more about that, because I do think it's a very important topic. I know it's a hot topic. I know it's a topic that will get a lot of hate, but we need to start having these discussions here, especially in South Florida. Most importantly this week, Disney sued Ron DeSantis. I read the lawsuit, 77 pages. It talks about there's a takings clause claim, there's a due process claim, there's 2 First Amendments claims, there's a contract clause. And so the question I've been getting all week is, well, why is Disney now suing? Why didn't they sue when the retaliation occurred last year when DeSantis dismantled the Reedy Creek board and instituted his own people onto the board? And the answer to that question, in my opinion, again, this is just my legal opinion, is that now the damages are present, right? They didn't really have damages before. So usually before you file a lawsuit, you have to have established damages during the lawsuit. And for the lawsuit, you have to establish damages. And so what happened was that the new board that took effect for Disney canceled certain development contracts that Disney had in place prior to the board coming into effect. And so it was $17 billion of development contracts that, would develop the area around Disney in the next decade, would provide 13,000 jobs in Florida, they canceled those contracts. And so you can't just go use your position as a board and cancel contracts that were already signed. You can't now just go void them because you feel like it, right? The other interesting claim in there are the First Amendment claims, because thanks to Citizens United, Disney is a person, according to the Supreme Court. And so, does the First Amendment apply to Disney? Could be so. We'll see what happens. It is a very, very interesting lawsuit. It's been assigned to Judge Mark Walker in the Northern District of Florida. I love Judge Walker. While I don't agree with all of his decisions, I will say most of his decisions, actually all of his decisions, let me go out on a limb there. All of his decisions are rooted in fact. It's rooted in the law, and they're very sound. And so even if an appeal is taken to the 11th Court of Appeals, which is a very conservative, Trump has stacked that court, even if that court looks to overturn any decision Judge Walker makes in this case, they're going to have a hard time because he is very smart. He's very spot on. I don't have any cases in the Northern District at this time, so I can make those claims. I haven't had a case in front of Judge Walker at all. So I feel free in saying that I actually like this judge. I'm a fan, and I think he's going to get it right. And so DeSantis is going to get a smackdown from the mouse. I honestly, looking at the lawsuit, and go pull it up. Again, Google is your friend. You can pull up the entire lawsuit. They quote a lot of his comments in the factual allegations portion of the complaint. They quote a couple of the representatives that specifically stated this was in retaliation to Disney not agreeing with Ron DeSantis. So, is it retaliation? Is it not? It's yet to be seen. It's a very interesting time to be a Floridian. It's a hurtful time to be a Floridian, to be quite honest. Every day I look at what's going on in the state, look at what's going on with our education system. My son is now in public school. He has a great teacher. He is an awesome teacher. He's in an awesome school with an awesome principal and an awesome teacher. But soon their hands are going to be tied on what they can and can't do. I mean, look at the Don't Say Gay bill. They've now, remember last year when they were passing it, this would only apply to K through 3rd grade. Well, it's now been expanded to apply through 12th grade. And so you can't talk about pronouns and, gender issues in class. But what's going to happen is, what about those high schoolers that are dealing with issues on how they identify? They can't even go to their guidance counselors now, to talk to their counselors. The whole point of having guidance counselors is for kids who can't talk to their parents at home, having that support. And so what happens now, where a child who trusts a teacher or a guidance counselor wants to talk to these education providers about what's going on, they can't even do it. And our teachers and guidance counselors can't have these discussions with them. I mean, it's really disheartening. You talk to any teacher who loves what they do, and most teachers love what they do because they would not be doing it if they didn't. They will tell you that they just feel like the rug is being pulled from under them at all costs. But again, we get what we voted for, guys. And you have now handed Floridians, we don't even have a balance. We don't even have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate to sort of have a balance here. We've got a governor who is promoting his fascism. I mean, he was in Jerusalem. He was in Japan. He's been on his little press tour setting up to announce his run for presidency. Meanwhile, here in Broward County, where I live, it's been underwater. We've got people who are displaced. He didn't call for a state of emergency. And we know why. We know it's because Broward County is a blue county and predominantly votes blue. And so he said, you know what, screw you guys, handle it yourself, right? So that's where we are. He's going to be running for president for the next 2 years, ignoring the rest of our state, and having his cronies in the House and the Senate in Florida pass these laws. And so, again, I am going to end the show with please, please, please contact 5 of your friends or family members. See if they're registered to vote. We've got a lot of time before 2024, and we've got the time to shore up votes and vote this craziness out of our state. We have to if we are to save Florida, if we're to save democracy. But I think I've talked a lot today. I'm going to end the show there. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's Chit Chatter with Rhea, and to all of our social media. Please comment on our Instagram posts and our social media posts. My assistant is lobbying me to start a TikTok account. I just don't know how to balance practicing law, running a business, being a mom, being a wife, and developing content, guys. It's hard. I don't know if you guys have ever filmed videos for Instagram, but shout out to these content creators because it's a hard job. It's a hard job. But I'll see you next time. Hopefully I will have a guest that I've been trying to book for a while on. In the meantime, pay attention to what's going on with our government and in your specific state, and let's figure out how to combat it. See you guys next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend wherever you get your podcasts and tell a friend. You can also follow the podcast on our social media pages.